Good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us so far. The webinar will commence in approximately 3 minutes. As we're waiting for the start of today's live webinar, I ask you to use the question dialog box located at the bottom right-hand side of your screen just to confirm that you can hear the audio, that you can see the screen, and that you can see my face. I'll be waiting for that confirmation before we proceed. Okay, I'm getting that confirmation that all is good. Glad you can see everything.
Derek, I think you may still be on mute.
Yes, I definitely am. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our live virtual panel. Of course, as we are live, we are subject to all kinds of technical difficulties and even just absent-mindedness of forgetting to unclick the mute option. So to make a quick introduction, my name is Derek Arcuri. I head up the industry marketing team at Genetec, and I have a focus on energy and utilities. I'm joined by Mark, who is the Director of Business Development at Archer. Mark, do you want to give a quick introduction to everyone?
Yeah, good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're at. Mark Bromstead, Director of Business Development here at Archer. I get to work with our business development and partnerships, along with some of our new clients that come on board here at Archer. So we're excited for the panel today.
Excellent. And I'll also invite Chris Davidson and Nick Weber to quickly introduce themselves, and do recall to show your webcams. There you guys go. So Chris Davidson, he's the Physical Security and Business Continuity Manager at Idaho Power. Chris, would you like to give everyone a quick introduction? And Chris, you are on mute.
Same problem. Like you said, Derek, Physical Security and Business Continuity Manager here at Idaho Power, also responsible for code of conduct for the company.
Thanks for that. And Nick Weber, you've worn many hats. Do you want to give everyone a quick introduction of where you were, your past 3 roles, just for some context?
Yeah, so I'm currently a senior security consultant at Archer. Work with a number of our clients on really any issues they have come up in the security, compliance, business continuity realms, pretty much anywhere that I can help out. Prior to that, I was the head of security at a small public utility district, or vertically integrated utility in central Washington, a couple dams on the Columbia River, and a bit of transmission distribution system. And before that, I spent a little over 3 years as a NERC SIP auditor at WEC. So I can kind of jump back and forth between those 3 different roles of auditor and practitioner and now assister.
Excellent, thanks for that. And one note that Mike Jones, who is the senior, just confirming, yeah, Mike Jones, who is the senior cybersecurity analyst at OneGas, he was intending to join us. He might still join us, but he does have a pressing, urgent matter that he has to attend to right now. So he might join us later on. Let's keep our fingers crossed. I do want to make just a few comments here. So throughout today's interactive live webinar, this is really your opportunity to interact with our participants. So feel free to submit any of your questions as they come about by using the question dialog box located at the top right-hand side of your screen. Mark will be actively monitoring that question box, and he'll be relaying those messages over to our 2 panelists today. Also note that today's webinar is being recorded for any of your colleagues that weren't able to join live. Okay, so what I'd like to do is just give a bit of context here for today's panel. So we know that in the energy and utilities industry that there are many things that are changing. What once was a very analog and scale-driven industry is becoming a lot more centralized and distributed. And there's an increasing amount of mergers and acquisitions within the energy and utilities industry. And often those mergers and acquisitions cause certain effects to what would be eventually silos within the organization. We're seeing a lot more digitization, and often we're seeing a lot of legacy security infrastructure out in the field. And we recognize that the change management process is often a very challenging one to undertake, and that's why we've put together a panel featuring change experts within their organizations. So they're going to be walking us through a change management process and how they've effectively modernized their security environment, their security technology. Mark, did you want to jump in and add a little bit more context?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. We've, being consultants, we see a lot of different environments, different levels of maturity, different levels of change. And so we really want to hear from all of you, all of the attendees on the call as well. You guys are all in different phases of your journey as it relates to physical security upgrades. So ask questions. Let's dive deeper alongside you. We may likely run out of time with all the questions we'll get. That's fine. We'll circle back with you after as well. So looking forward to a great dialogue. So thank you.
We're going to jump right into our panel for the day, and then we'll end off with an open roundtable for everyone to dive in and start asking our panelists questions. So our first question that we have prepared, and I'll direct this over to you, Chris, from Idaho Power. What is your vision for security within your organization, and how do you see that practice evolving over the years as the market continues to change?
Great, thanks, Eric. For us, one of the biggest pieces was utilizing technology just to fundamentally transform how we do security operations day in and day out. So our legacy systems and the old way that we were doing it was very reactionary in its nature. And so we wanted to be more proactive with our security operations and utilize technology to do that proactive piece, kind of flipping it from a pull strategy to a push strategy, and using those technologies to enable more efficient, informed security operations, security operators in our operations center. We have a centralized model that we want to continue to grow on. And the technology, I think, is key to delivering the information to our security operators to give them a good operating picture across the enterprise, situational awareness, and do it all with a high level of accuracy and utilize a lot of different technologies. It helps us, technology gives us the scale that we need to continue to grow and just be more efficient and strong with our security operations.
Thanks for that, Chris. So moving from reactive to proactive, this pull methodology more towards a push methodology, this shift towards centralized types of security practice, and then leveraging that technology for growth. Nick, from your perspective, what was that vision? Perhaps we'll start with your history from the utility standpoint. Could you walk us through what your vision for security was and how you've seen that evolve over the years?
A big part of that was just establishing ourselves as a business enabler rather than the Department of No. Did that with trying to generate or deliver support in some non-traditional ways. So we were able to, once we got some of the systems pulled together, we were able to start pushing some support out with our facilities folks, our IT help desk, and help field some calls after hours, triaging things, cutting down on their labor costs and letting their employees have a little better work-life balance was a real win-win. And it didn't cost us much more than just getting some good SOPs put together and, again, having that foundational system in place.
And so, Nick, this was from your experience at Grant County PUD. And what I find interesting is that your vision for security was much more than just security, right? You're actively contributing in other departments and helping other departments strive for more of a work-life balance. So it's good to see that you had a vision that was, a lot more, that really spanned beyond security. So I want to spend a little bit of time on what actively triggered that decision. Like, what was that moment in time when the security project started to move forward? What triggered your actual decision to modernize your security technology? Chris, we'll start with you.
Well, for us, it was just taking a real deep dive into what our security operations and our technologies were, what they were doing, and actually measuring them, trying to figure out the value that they were providing versus the costs, and then how those measured up with where we wanted to go in terms of our vision of how we wanted to operate our security operations. And so we had multiple SOC operators responding to multiple events, tons of inefficiencies. We had high labor costs. It was open to compliance mistakes as well for those that are regulated in the compliance area. And the systems themselves weren't intelligent on their own. So after we did that kind of analysis, we knew that we wanted to move on to something that would not only transform what we do today, but then meet where we wanted to go in the future. And so we wanted to move to a single platform and stop managing multiple legacy systems, to focus more on making the system provide us with the intelligence and the action items that drove our operator actions and our security team's actions, rather than the individuals themselves having to do the detect, assess, respond type functionality. So, and we wanted that system also to be open so that we can scale in the future and take advantage of new technology that comes into the marketplace, but still deliver it to our operators and to our security teams in a platform that they're used to and already trained on. So all of those type of things, when we measured all of our legacy systems, led us to the point where that was the real trigger to say, okay, we need to make an investment in changing now, and one that sets us up for realizing that vision in the future.
Yeah, and Chris, you touched on a lot of great points that I think a lot of your peers today on the webinar, you're probably resonating with them, right? Because you touched on the sizing up the cost of these inefficiencies, on the cost of your operators expected to respond to incidents, to detect, deter, or detect, delay, deter, assess, communicate, and respond, and follow through that methodology, but based on training where that could have been automated, where the technology can really help guide the operators, and that can ultimately help reduce those high labor costs, the costs of compliance. So it's interesting to see how you got the project moving by building up or calculating the cost of the same. The cost of, if we continue like this today, this will only cost us in the longer run. Whereas if we were to migrate to a better platform, one that's scalable, one that's built on open architecture, we would eventually save, we would eventually find more efficiencies down the long run. And before I throw the question over to Nick, I actually have a poll for all of the webinar registrants. The poll that I'm just launching right now is how many security applications do you have installed within your security operations center? Your options are less than 2, between 3 and 5, between 5 and 7, and 10 or more. Now, you might be asking, well, what is a security application? Think of intrusion management. Do you have a security application that manages all of your intrusion points for interior, also for your perimeter? Do you have an access control system that is maybe separate from your video or CCTV system? Perhaps it is a license plate recognition system. Perhaps it's an incident management system, a digital evidence management system. These are all what often is siloed and applications that have been designed and developed by different manufacturers that make its way into your overall security environment. So just looking at the responses here, we have about 18 that say less than 2, 65% between 3 and 5 security applications, now that's 67%, and 11% between 5 and 7 security applications.
And Derek, while folks are continuing to respond there, one of the questions that has popped up is, did you have more of a challenge replacing technology within your organization or introducing new technology? So Chris, I don't know if you can expand on that, where from a leadership perspective, where you had more of your challenges.
You know, I think the big piece for us with leadership was ensuring that we knew the problem we were trying to solve with the technology and where we were going, so they could see that part of it, and then show them that the current technology, even if we were to invest in it and try and grow it, the manufacturers or the producers of that, didn't have the right product for the future. And so I think rightfully so, they challenge you to make sure that it is a good investment and it will meet that future need. But we were able to overcome that by just demonstrating where we wanted to go, what failures that the product had today and why it couldn't scale and change in the future to be the same. So that's kind of where we ran into that.
Great, thanks, Chris.
And Nick, we never got to you, but going back to our question, what triggered your original decision to modernize your security technology? Could you walk us through where you guys were?
Actually, to me, it was so obvious that I essentially made it a condition of employment that we would start a technology upgrade when I got there, just from my interview process, realizing how many legacy systems had been inherited. Some had been installed by operations, others by facilities, others by, I believe IT may have had a bit, our telecommunications group had done some, and it was a hodgepodge. There was, I believe, 3 different platforms for video management on 4 or 5 different versions. They'd pulled all the access control together, but it was on a well past end of life system that wasn't able to meet some of our compliance requirements. And coming fresh out of WEC at that point, those were near and dear to my heart. We couldn't have a way to do any sort of tracking on the 15-minute alerting, even what I would consider fairly rudimentary, being able to alarm on multiple invalid access attempts. Had to have some workarounds put in to do that. So it was a huge, or an obvious one for us right off the bat that needed to be done. It wasn't real hard to get everybody on board with it. It needed to be done, but getting folks over the hump with that was a little bit more of a challenge. that was kind of the trigger piece on that. It was just trying to get everything, like Chris had said, everything under one umbrella. Try to get our arms around it.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how we've seen that a lot with many organizations, both within energy and utilities and outside, where there wasn't a complete ownership, where there might have been systems that are deployed in different departments, and often it takes that leadership in order to get everything under one umbrella. Curious, Nick, how would you estimate how old were these legacy systems? Maybe a ballpark average. We know that often the shelf life of an access control system could be between 15 to 20 years. Could you maybe comment on the age of these systems, or is that something that you'd know?
I want to say ballpark on the access control was probably between 10 to 15 years. But the bigger driver on that was that it was a proprietary system and they'd done an upgrade. So almost all of our door controllers were obsolete. And we were at the point of scrounging eBay and anybody who was getting rid of the system, trying to find parts for it. That was the bigger driver. On the video side, we actually, I believe there was one piece that still ran on a DVR. So I would say that one was well over 15 years old. It was about the same as what you'd see on the news from a 7-Eleven crime show. I mean, there's something blurry moving over there, but it was worthless from a security perspective.
Yeah, and Nick, what I'll actually do is get the opinion of everyone else on today's webinar. So I've just launched a poll. How old is your current access control system? Your options are less than 5 years, between 6 and 10 years, between 10 and 20 years, and more than 20. And just as a few of the responses are trickling in, we see that about 60 or about 50% are saying less than 5 years, which is great to see. 29% between 6 years and 10 years, 20% within 10 years and 20 years. Just going to leave that open for attendees to respond. How about you, Chris? While we're waiting for attendees to collect their responses, what would you estimate was the sort of shelf life or the age of your access control system before deciding to modernize?
I would say it was at least 10 plus. You know, one of the other things that we see a lot too with a lot of platforms is over time, the developers, you know, they get a lot of feedback from all the clients and customers, and you know, there's all these new enhancements and features, and they put all these things in there, and the actual program itself becomes so big, it has so many component pieces to it. They don't all work together well because they all came from different visions, and that was kind of where we were at with our access control system, is that it was so big, had so many different things to it, but was not user-friendly, was not efficient at doing some of the basic things that we wanted it to do. And I think just its age over time and not growing and maturing that platform seamlessly and in an intelligent way led it to be more of a hindrance for our future growth and to do more with it than just monitor doors.
Yeah, that's a great point, right? There's so much more we can do with access control than to just manage locks and doors, right? From the reporting capabilities to help other departments, peer departments be more effective at their jobs. And so I think that's a great point to really zone in on. And you know, circling back with the concept of proprietary systems, right? Like you have these old systems that are maybe reaching end of life, where you're stuck now purchasing parts on eBay. Obviously not a scalable way to move forward. And I think that we're seeing the industry migrate more and more. Organizations are migrating towards an open platform. A platform where, irrespective of the security, the software layer, you could really pop in different hardware components that ultimately meet your need. Nick, Chris, is that where you guys are seeing the market evolve as well? Maybe Mark, do you want to chime in terms of, do you see this sort of fundamental shift from proprietary hardware and software to becoming more of an open architecture type model?
I'll let Nick take it first, and then I've got some questions that have come in as well. But so Nick and then Chris.
Yeah, even last night I saw on the ASIS Connect open community, there was a question about some of the better open systems out there. I think most people are looking at that kind of for future proofing, so they don't get into a situation where they're trying to scrounge parts from an obsolete system. I know on the technology side, our technology group was over the moon that we had selected. They had some leadership changes after we made the selection, but they were over the moon that we'd selected an open system, just because it gave them so much flexibility going forward. I see that being the wave of the future. The more proprietary, the harder it's going to be to integrate and really be that business support.
Yeah, I wouldn't add a ton there. I think with the open systems, I think the competition is good as well. It helps drive the systems to maintain its value. And then also, you know, with proprietary systems, you don't have expertise in everything from a security technology piece. And so I just think that you get locked down to not be able to use new and innovative products in a centralized manner if you're not, you know, in that open architecture, because it's not your area of expertise, and therefore to try and make something like it is never making the thing that was new in the marketplace and innovative. So yeah, I think it as a business and user, that open platform is huge for us in being able to constantly source the market and always be pushing our security posture forward.
Very good. Well, thank you. And one of the questions that came in that probably complements this direction of conversation really well is, who are the decision makers when it comes to such a change, and how many decision makers are there? So Chris, maybe if you want to think on that one for a second. So, you know, different departments, yeah, different thought leaders within the organization. So I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, ours, I would say for us, it's, you know, there's always a committee, a capital investing committee that we, you know, first off for us is making sure that the leadership in our chain understands it, and that what we're proposing to bring forward to a larger audience of stakeholders and executives, that they agree with it, they understand with it, where it's going. So, you know, we have to do that chain first usually, and then we branch out from there if it's supported all the way up at the executive level. That committee, you know, is very detail oriented, and is going to scrutinize your plans and make sure that you've, you know, done all of your strategic evaluation and make sure everything makes sense. But so I think it's kind of just a step process for us of you know, starting small, gaining immediate leadership and leadership chain, and then as you grow and build that out, having them introduce it to the larger group and support it and show their support, and having a good story to tell, I think helps ultimately the decision makers make that decision.
Thanks, Chris. Nick, anything to add there? Different vantage point? Mute point. Can't hear you, Nick.
Oh, sorry. My turn to have the mute button. So no, I think it's definitely going to be organizationally driven. I know for us, it seemed like there was a lot more decision makers than I ever could have imagined. But when you start touching these security systems, there's a lot of different places that it's going to go. So, but I think Chris definitely nailed it with having your information together up front and ready to go, answer the questions wherever they come from.
Very good. And then maybe one more quick question, Derek, and then we'll go back to some of what you have, and we'll get through the rest of these also. You guys talked about different conversations that you're having with your leadership team to bring folks along, leverage the committees. What sort of metrics did you use in order to really just say either one, you needed to make the change, or two, that you maybe even came back and said, boy, we made the change and these are the metrics we're seeing? So Nick, I'll throw that one to you first, if that's okay. Sorry, I should have said that first. So what sort of metrics did you use?
The biggest drivers we used were time and money. What comes down to it, for the CFO side, it was how much money are we spending, whether it's labor or the increased cost for managing a proprietary system, not being able to rely on some of our internal resources much because it was a specialized system. For the operations side, it's how much time are we spending trying to run down alarms or pulling their folks away to help us pull wire or troubleshoot issues. Those are the two big ones. And once we started to really put solid math behind that, it made the business case really start to move.
Excellent. And Chris?
Very similar. I mean, for us, one of the first and easiest piece was the hard benefits. You know, what money can we save, and how do you quantify that and show that to executives? Because it's a big piece of it. And so, you know, in our world, we were taking care of two systems with two different infrastructures, and we were paying a certain amount of cost for each of those systems. And so those reasons, you know, we were really able to measure those two versus an open platform that we wanted to move to. And then I think also just doing the nitty gritty work of quantifying the soft benefits, the things that you could realize in a future state as well. And so efficiencies gained in all of your operations, and actually figuring out a way to quantify that. Also cost avoidance in the future. If we were to continue growing and scaling the system that we had, we're going to end up needing more labor to look at it because it wasn't as efficient at driving data to my operations center folks and my security teams. And so cost avoidance of O&M labor was something that we used and demonstrated in there to really help drive that point home. And then I think the last piece was the strategic benefits, and that's showing where the new system that you're thinking about is going and how it can add more things in than just reviewing video, watching live video, and seeing door access alarms come in. Once you add that in, that kind of paints a holistic picture for the leadership team to be able to say, I can support that, I can get on board with that, and you know, even if it's cost neutral.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate that.
Great, and I'm sure you guys have all noticed a fifth panelist that's joined us today. So thank you, Mike, for being able to join. We understand that you had an urgent matter, and we understand that given the nature of our business. We just want to take a quick pause right here to maybe give you some time, Mike, to introduce yourself to everyone.
Yeah, my name is Michael Jones, and I run the physical security department for One Gas. We are a natural gas distribution company. So basically, you know, from like a border city gate to the burner tip. We're spread out between 3 states, Kansas gas, Oklahoma gas, natural gas, and Texas gas service.
Great, Mike, and again, we appreciate you joining in. And just to give you a bit of context, we were just talking about some of the, you know, how these change leaders have been actually quantifying the benefits of changing to their capital investment committee, making it easier to understand for their CFO to really understand, both in terms of time of money, additionally the cost benefits, some of the cost avoidance. And we're actually just going to lead into our next question, which was, well, what were some of the immediate benefits once you've actually started using this newer security platform? What were some of the immediate benefits that you've noticed once you've actually migrated compared to the previous platform? Mike, did you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. So in my environment, you know, we're 3 kind of different divisions spread out between 3 different states. In the past, everything was kind of done independently. Every state did things differently. Every region did things a little differently. So now, you know, we can control things from one central platform. We can control doors, gates, we can manage intercoms, you know, across the environment. We've brought a lot of ability to monitor different things in the environment. Same thing with our operations side, not just our facilities, but our you know, what would typically be a site out in the middle of nowhere. You know, we approach it from the safety side too. We've provided lighting solutions that we can remotely control as well. So we've kind of really attacked it from a safety perspective as well as, you know, a security perspective. And but it's been kind of taken some time to really sell it to the enterprise and make them understand how a centrally managed platform provides so much more value to the environment.
And a follow-up question from that is, by partnering with other departments like facilities and operations and compliance, did that help improve funding? Did that help get sort of that project kicked over the fence? Did maybe funding even come from other departments like IT because they saw the value in actually centralizing and modifying those practices from something that was really distributed to more of a centralized model?
It's been kind of a little different for us because, IT really didn't want the security aspect of things. And, one of the things I kind of heard as I started developing this department is, we've gone to IT over the years, but this just isn't their forte. It's not what they do. But what I do is I now have all these other departments help me basically support me as I ask for more money. I mean, in my past world, I've been a network guy and a cybersecurity guy, and man, I avoided HR and legal and audit, and now those people are my friends. I reach out to them and I try to sell what we do to help them do their job better. And they've become huge assets for me. So, when we have an issue, maybe somebody gets hurt or there's an issue or there's damage someplace, I mean, anything from claims to employee safety and health to audit to HR, I mean, we've really kind of proven to them what we can provide from an intelligence standpoint and the data around, whatever that is. And then, they've kind of now are understanding more of what we do and are coming to us to help them do their job better.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mike. And I imagine has it been easy to sort of quantify the benefits of migrating over to a new platform, one that's it's based off of open architecture, one that's a lot more scalable now that you've been able to centralize?
I mean, I think it's really been kind of a challenge because just a lot of people don't understand how things work. Even from the audit perspective, is they always looked at us as, let's say access control, for example, is, well, you're just denying somebody access. Well, there's a lot more to it. I'm creating an auditability a trail around who is where. Where did people go? Are people where they're supposed to be? Are they doing something they're not supposed to be doing? So it's taken a lot of time for us to sell ourselves and sell what we can do. One of the things I always sell us is being a solution provider. Like, let us help you do your job better because we can find something. Because again, data, everything's going to data, and that's what this platform provides, is a lot of data.
Yeah, that's a good point there, Mike. Like that's definitely potentially a key motivation for others, some of your peers on this panel today, on the actual audience, as the type of insights that they're able to gather from one centralized system, as opposed to having to jump into access control 1, 2, and 3, or your video system, or like all these different siloed security applications. Having everything centralized into one platform probably is invaluable for your organization.
It truly is. I mean, we buy pretty much about everything that Genetec sells, but it allows us to build that solid foundation for the whole company.
And what about you, Chris? What were some of the benefits? Like once you knew what benefits to expect by adopting this centralized, unified vision for security, what were some of the actual benefits that you've realized upon migrating?
Quite a few different ones. And I think in the operational realm, we got some immediate user efficiency gains out of our operations centers and our security teams that were using the system. There was a slew of enhancements that came with reducing noise, which is always something operations centers fight against. There's a ton of data out there. There's a lot of things that you can alarm off of, but you want quality out of those pieces of technology. And I think the aggregation abilities that we have in the Genetec system for us was a huge gain on keeping our operators focused on things that we deem important versus just noise. I think the other thing was labor gains. Our training costs and our time to train operators came way down because we're only training on one system. And when you have that, it doesn't take an extended amount of time to learn that as well. And then from turnover, the reduce of impact of turnover in that position. If someone left before in some of these proprietary and one-off older platforms, the price that you pay as a company to retrain that new person, that's a very, very high impact. And so some of also that kind of, I mentioned earlier, the switching from a push to a pull strategy, with the system driving a lot of what the operators do and controlling their response to it, it's a quicker and easier training piece because you don't have to teach them to utilize the tool at a very, very high level, the tool does a lot of it automated, and then they are responding on the very key pieces that take human response pieces to it. So I think that was another big piece of it. Innovative tools that we gained with it. So we started being able to mix and match things. Cameras and card readers talk to each other. You have overlays of visual mapping from we had our own mapping department here at the company that used ArcGIS. Well, we can overlay all of that into the system. And so when an event comes in the system, we now have a better idea of what that site looks like, what's going on, all the tools at our fingertips, especially for someone who's centralized and had probably never seen that facility or that site. So that was a huge gain for us. Obviously, we're a regulated industry, so for us, compliance gains, that was a really big piece of this. So we have better data that proves out how we are meeting our compliance requirements. We always knew we're meeting our compliance requirements, but the show your work part of it is very, very tough, especially if you have multiple systems. And so it lowered our company's costs of compliance and audit preparations, because we would have teams of people getting data from different databases and report developers getting ready to take these raw bits of data from different systems and paint a picture of what SIP compliance we are meeting. And we kind of gained that ability by building it into the system, so to speak, rather in one spot than having to go all over the place for it. So it also reduced the variability between the operators that are responding to compliance related events. And we can control that a lot better and make it consistent and capture all of that. And so I think those for us, it also just it costs less for us to maintain one single system and the infrastructure of it than multiple. And so that was another big win that we caught right away.
Yeah, and I'm sure that those costs are probably really hard to calculate, especially over the long run. Like how much time and energy and cost does it like, if your environment, for all of the attendees on the webinar, if your environment is a lot of different systems, there's costs from an operator training standpoint, as Chris alluded to. There's costs from an infrastructure maintenance standpoint, where IT might have to manage an upgrade for one system and it maybe breaks the compatibility if there's an integration with the rest in your JSOC. So it's a lot of tangible hard benefits to actually migrating, and we're happy to see that, Chris, that you're seeing those benefits. I did want to spend a bit of time on the cost of compliance, and I want to actually throw it over to Nick. Nick was a former SIP auditor, and so I want to get his perspective on. I'm not sure if Nick, if you've ever audited a utility where they've been able to sort of simplify their evidence and their simplify, I guess, the dissemination of information to ensure that things are being followed properly. Could you speak a little bit, could you wear your SIP auditor hat and speak a little bit to some of the benefits of a utility that's actually centralized from an auditor standpoint?
Yeah, that's honestly a no-brainer from the auditor perspective. One of the big things that the auditors are always trying to get to is reasonable assurance. There's an understanding that absolute compliance is really kind of a unicorn. So you're trying to make sure that the processes are in place to make sure that they're getting it right the vast majority of the time. So the more automation you can see, the cleaner it is, the easier it is for them to respond to your questions. The faster you're going to get there, the less time your SMEs are going to spend face-to-face getting grilled by the auditors, fewer RFIs or data requests they're going to get. It just, the better you can paint that picture, the more organized you are, the more it shows your culture and how well you're meeting those requirements. So when we see something that, like Chris has explained, where it's soup to nuts, it's pretty easy to pull everything together, we're not going to dig real deep because we know that you've demonstrated you've got your evidence all together relatively quickly and easily. That tells us that you're staying on top of it the other 3 years between us visiting you. So that's one of the key things to having that well-prepared evidence. And as one of my colleagues refers to it, the auditor repellent is very key in this.
That's super interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's nice to get that perspective from the auditor's angle, right? I like how you said that we're not going to dig that deep. If you just you show that you have the whole picture painted, then you're probably going to have a better experience with the auditor. The auditor utility experience is probably going to be a lot better. So it's interesting to get that perspective. Now, I want to shift gears and circle back to the idea of interacting with other departments. So I'll throw it over to you, Mike. Can you describe your interactions now with your current platform based off of Genetec? What are your interactions now with departments like safety, facilities, operations, IT, and compliance? What value do you find that your current platform is able to bring to those departments?
I mean, it's a multitude of things, really. So, we end up, we'll find an initiative that's trying to be put in, or an initiative that's trying to be enforced, and we kind of insert ourselves and come up with a solution. And then we sit down and we explain to them what we can provide to them, how we can manage it, how we can deal with it, how we can monitor it, and then just show them that data. And it's, again, it's kind of teaching them what we can do. A lot of it they just don't understand, right? They don't get it. Maybe they don't understand it. But I mean, I'm always interjecting myself. Anytime I find something new coming down the pipe, I put ourselves in the middle of it. We include ourselves in things. We call meetings and say, hey, did you know we can do this? So we sell ourselves all the time. I mean, that's the biggest thing we've had to work on, is we really sell ourselves all the time. We never stop. And it's one of the things I explain to my guys all the time. We're on a site or we're at a different location and somebody comes up to us, spend however long it takes to talk to them. Because, we have a lot of people that come up to us and, oh, it's you security guys. They don't like us. They don't want us there. And, we'll sit for an hour and a half and just talk to them and make them understand, why we do what we do. We're here to protect, you guys, the people, our employees, as well as, our equipment, our assets, and then our data. Those are our three primary goals. And, usually by the end of all those conversations, man, we're friends and we talk and they reach out to us for things.
Thanks for that, Mike. How about you, Chris? What were some of the value that you're able to offer? Like as Mike talked about, how he's helped build credibility with the overall organization. Could you speak to what actual tactical improvements or relationship improvements that you've been able to make with your new platform?
Yeah, I mean, we rebuilt our operations center about 18 months ago. And as we were kind of getting into that piece of it, we wanted to better understand what groups we could help, and then also conversely, what data and operations from other groups can help us, because data to them may help them with their business operations and they see it through their lens, and then I see the same data and I see a different story when looking at it through my lens. And so when we rebuilt our operations center from being a siloed security operations center, we actually built it and we call it our integrated operations center. And so as part of that development, we have cybersecurity team, our EMS team, our IT team, and our own internal comms team. All were major stakeholders in that, and we all got together to figure out, how we can benefit each other. And so, we have that integrated center now where everyone is co-located. Our information and video and data from our security systems help inform teams like our NOC teams that are monitoring data centers, or our EMS team that sees something going on out in the field, and they're looking at it from an operational perspective, and the video can enhance their knowledge of how to handle the situation that they're dealing with. So it's really been a great tool for us to kind of build that symbiotic relationship with a lot of those groups. We kind of already had it with some of your standard ones like HR and compliance, but this really helped push us out of the box even more, and we can benefit from it as well.
Yeah, it's interesting to see that partnership being built, exchange of information between security to other departments and vice versa. I do want to throw it over to Nick before we start getting some of the questions. Mark will actually speak to some of the questions that are coming in. Nick, how about you? Perhaps whether you're speaking from Grant County PUD or from other roles, what are some of the potential partnerships that you've seen security have with other departments?
That was one of the things at Grant where I actually came in with it through an introduction through the compliance team there, because I'd known them from auditing and generally harassing them for the 3 years before that. So I already had that relationship in place. But I was very fortunate that the director I worked for at the time she was very clear that my goal was to build relationships, not to destroy them or burn bridges. So we actually came up with an informal department motto that we were the Grant Public Utility District, not the Grant Public Security District. That if we weren't supporting the utility as a whole, then we were failing, because we don't generate money. So if we weren't helping out, then we weren't doing our job. And that's usually how I kicked off every time we were asked to present at a safety meeting or even to our board. I would make sure I put that right up front, that we're not the tip of the spear for the utility. We're here to support. And if we're not doing that, then we have some things we need to fix. And that really rang, I think the first couple of times I said it, I think especially some of the craft kind of like, yeah, we've heard this before. But by the third or fourth time they heard it, and they more importantly started seeing that behind the scenes, like Mike was talking, get out and talk to people, ask them what their pain points are and try to fix them, especially if it's an easy win. If you can do that low-hanging fruit and build that cred, that really helped when I needed their help to get a project over the hump there. From the auditor perspective, you can see that from a mile away. If there's that silo, it's usually we'd see it with the first batch of evidence we got. You could tell. And the worse the silos, the easier you see it. But by the time you're on site and really knee deep into the evidence, it's obvious. And you have violations, I would say, exponentially more in the siloed organizations rather than the ones that have broken through those barriers. And it's disheartening. There's one in particular I always think of when I hear silos, because it was a relatively small utility that I believe they had 9 different regulated business units. And you'd have 8 who would knock it out of the park, and you'd have 1 who would miss. But there's no violation for a business unit. It's for the entire utility. So that was always disheartening to see, because you'd see 8 teams who had just crushed it all get let down by one peer. So definitely important. And security is kind of one of the few underpinnings for all the business units that we used ourselves kind of to help the company break some of those silos too. One of the big ones we always had, they called it the I-90 divide, because our power production side was all south of Interstate 90, whereas most of the rest utilities on the north side. And they were different. They were almost different companies at times, it felt like. But we had to be able to play in both those sandboxes. So a lot of times we would help facilitate just small things, but help facilitate some of that coordination. And it seemed to work as well or better than it did necessarily from the top down when they were trying to push some of that play nice piece. Just because we had that cred and we were kind of that same level, more of a peer than a directive.
Thanks for that, Nick. And Mark, I'll throw it over to you to scan some of the questions. I do want to remind everyone that we have about 10 minutes left of the webinar. So we'll just do our best to get to all the questions, and then maybe we'll end off with 2 more of the questions that we've prepared for today's panel.
Perfect. If you guys are okay, I'll kind of do just a kind of a quick rapid fire question. We'll get through a few of these, and then I'll turn it back over to Derek, and any of them that are left unsaid, we'll follow up after. Couple different questions on the impact on COVID. So maybe Mike, if I can direct this one to you, Mike Jones, how did COVID impact how you manage access control?
That's been a big one for us. We've definitely been deemed an essential team. A lot of our sites have greatly locked down. We've changed the way certain business units, you got gas control, you got call centers, dispatch centers. We've had to really limit access. We just recently stood up a SOC literally at the beginning of the COVID. So the SOC has been really instrumental. We've been kind of working part-time with those guys to train them and get them up to speed on how we do things. But it is one good thing is the facilities group, we used to kind of have that banter back and forth. Why do we access control areas? Why do we create restricted areas or secured areas? And now they fully understand it, because, we've had certain sites that we haven't been able to control like they wanted to. And now they're like, man, we really should have access controlled extra doors and been able to control where people go. So we've been really instrumental in securing the environment. Plus, now we have a lot of facilities and buildings that are empty, which means we're prime targets for theft. I mean, we've had theft and vandalism rampant in certain areas, and the SOC has actually been instrumental at catching or deterring issues. And we call that out as we find it. We let everybody all the way up the chain know that, hey, we caught this person, or we scared them off. Pictures tell 1,000 words, and we'll run pictures up the chain, and when people see those, they're like, wow, there's somebody walking across your site in the middle of the night. And what if a worker was there? What if a worker showed up for an emergency call out? And we saw them, and we were able to run them off.
Great, thanks, Mike. Staying on the COVID-19, Nick, I'll maybe throw this one your way. Do you think that the COVID-19 is a trigger for technology updates, given what Mike just said might be true? So, Nick, what are your thoughts?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we're seeing a lot of places that are probably going to stick with more of a remote workforce, and that's going to bring a whole lot of other challenges, obviously on the cyber side, but also on the physical security side. Particularly the smaller utilities where you get to really know everyone, and you may even have family members that both work for the utility. How do you manage their safety during the day? That you can't completely abdicate that, or maybe you can, it's up to your organization. But we actually had a few cases when I was at Grant where there were things that happened outside the workplace, but again, we took our job protecting the employees very seriously, that we would either give advice or point employees towards some more specialized pieces for their home security, because there were challenges there. I think that may be something we start to see corporate security departments having to get more attentive that direction. It's definitely going to be a game changer. And then when we start to bring people back in, there's a lot of different pieces to COVID. I've seen a ton of folks talking about the thermal scanners or ways to still have that access throughput, but be able to pinpoint somebody maybe symptomatic. And I think an open platform is going to be key to that, so you can start to pull it into that security center and have that single pane of glass where you can see that data.
Yeah, just like what you said, one of the things we've done is we've created thermal testing stations. We've got 8 sites that we've rolled out because we're starting to get people back to work, and they're relying on us to design it, implement it, and then monitor it.
Very good. Well, Derek, I'll turn it back over to you, and we'll answer some remaining questions if we have a couple minutes at the end. Otherwise, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So I did want to skip ahead to one of the last questions that we had actually prepared, which is what, and Chris, you've actually touched a little bit on this, and I want to explore that in a little bit more detail. So what were some of the operational improvements that you've seen since implementing your incident management system, your Genetec mission control product? Chris, do you want to maybe start?
Yeah, for us, it was an instrumental piece of the Genetec platform in helping us do the detect feature better, the detect, assess, respond kind of functional requirements. Some of the big gains that we see there on the operations side, the aggregation abilities to be able to layer in multiple triggering events and use kind of logical statements, if this and or that type of layering between raw trigger data from hardware that's out in the field was tremendous, like I said, in reducing noise in our operations center, reducing the number of alarms that we're getting, even from very controlled areas like our restricted areas that are super controlled, but they also have a lot of noise with people in their throughput into those areas. So that was a big piece for us on the aggregation side. The other piece I talked about is, the ability to present steps to operators in a linear flow that is very specific to this one event type. And so that's been huge for us in responding to compliance events, potential compliance events, and also kind of wide open security incidents like panic alarms being pulled at remote facilities, threat lockdowns, things of that nature. It gives you that consistency that you could have a green operator in there, and so long as they can see the one step in front of them, do that one thing, hit next, it's going to step them through every single piece of it. And so that's been huge for a training and consistency piece with the operators. And I think compliance-wise, you can create and develop those workflows to mirror and create the data that you need or the metadata you need to demonstrate SIP compliance. And so for controlling access into our SIP restricted areas, when those create alarms, you can see every click, you can quantify the time in between that, from when I responded to the alarm to when I resolved the alarm, what was the outcome, and all of it is completely controlled and crafted and gets rid of some of that freehand that used to take place where it was up in someone's head and then the data was all over the place, and trying to put together a story to tell your story of that event was very difficult. And I think Mission Control for us was a tremendous enabler of telling our security story and then also telling the compliance story as well.
So, Chris, I'd like to end off with our final question. Apologies I can't get to you, Mike or Nick, around the mission control discussion, but I just want to leave the last few minutes to end off with your key recommendations that you have for all of our audience members today. So, what recommendation do you have for your peers in the audience that are maybe considering modernizing their security environment? Mike, can we start with you?
Oh, you repeat that again? It cut out on me.
Yeah,
Sorry.
sure. So what are some of the recommendations that you have for your peers in the audience today, for those that are considering maybe modernizing their security environment?
The biggest thing for me is and I make my integrators mad all the time, is, I always say we choose our own destiny. I build relationships with you guys, as well as, our distribution companies, our manufacturers. I like to talk to them directly. We research out our own product. We don't let anybody bring something to us and say, this is what you need. We decide what we need, because there's a lot of cool stuff out there, and some of it just doesn't fit my environment, because I know our environment better than anybody. So what I would tell everybody is to do your homework, do your research, and don't rely on somebody to sell you and tell you what you need. You figure it out and build those relationships, because that's how you really find out, what's the best fit for your environment.
Thanks for that, Mike. And how about you, Nick? What are some recommendations you have for our audience members?
I'd start off with echoing Mike's comment about take yourself to school, learn exactly what you have, what you need. I know when we were looking at this, I spent almost $20,000 on a training session, took my key leaders out to the core group out in Baltimore. We spent a week basically with pen testers, learning all the different ways to break a system so we could come back and apply that as we were building out our new system. We were buying a Cadillac and we didn't want to have a 30-cent vulnerability because the door didn't fit correctly. It's also where we really learned and got the entire team up on using OSDP and doing an end-to-end encryption from the reader all the way back into the server. Taking away those cheap, easy vulnerabilities that a YouTube video can teach anyone how to exploit. That was really helpful. Our leadership initially, when I said I wanted $20,000 for one training event, and I wanted to take my entire leadership team, they essentially told me, no, get out of here. But when I came back and said, well, we're going to spend this $20,000 to make sure we don't waste any of our $1.4 million on this project, that quickly flipped the script where that was a good investment. And out of all the decisions I made, I think that was probably the best one I did, because it really helped us with some potentially costly missteps to avoid those.
Great, thanks for that, Nick. Yeah, I could definitely see how that training is justified, especially when the project is so high on your priority list. How about you, Chris? Just to end off today's webinar, what are some recommendations you have for the audience today?
I think Mike and Nick pretty much, a lot of great points there. I would say just that, really recommend spending a lot of time trying to define the problem you're trying to solve. I think a lot of times it takes a lot of work to understand your system's impact and the fact that it exists within your company from front end to back end. And a lot of times as an end user or business unit, we spend a lot of time focused on how we would use a system and look at it through just that lens. But there's so many other different lenses to look through as you consider moving in that direction, from its impact on the back end and IT and the infrastructure, your network capabilities, bandwidth. There's so many things to consider. And then you take all of that and then also say, where am I trying to go? So as you're trying to solve that problem, you're also you're solving for the problems that you have today and the legacy systems that you have, but you also need to know that whatever you're selecting is going to be viable, so you're not doing these projects every 5 to 7 years. It needs to be something that can do both. And so I think that's an important part. And I think everyone's kind of mentioned it. You have to spend that time up front. It takes a lot of research. it takes doing the nitty-gritty work of turning that data into quantifiable evidence that helps you justify that business case and allows you to move forward.
Great words of wisdom. Thanks for imparting your wisdom as change agents within your organization. Now, just to bring today's webinar to a wrap, I do want to call attention to if you'd like to contact folks from Genetec or folks from Mark, here are the people to contact. We have Mark, who's our moderator today. You could reach him at that email address on the slide, and Greg Kemper, who is the head of business development for the US, but he can put you in contact with the right individual based on wherever you are. I don't know what you guys think, Mike, Chris, and Nick, but often when we get to collaborate together, when you're working with your peers, when you're sharing best practices, it's a great way of benchmarking, right? So I do want to enable a poll here. Tell me if, for those that are still on with us, tell us if you are interested in participating in an end user group. And options are yes or no. So an end user group is really just a meeting where we get organizations within the same industry together, talking about a variety of different discussions. And it's a great way to sort of benchmark yourselves, get ideas as to what other security departments are doing, how they're leveraging technology to help with operational improvements in other departments and things like that. Looks like everyone's saying yes. So what we'll do is we'll actually pull out that data and we're going to share it with Greg's team so that we know who would like to participate in the next end user group. So I do want to end off by thanking our panelists again for your time today. Nick Weber from Archer, Chris Davidson from Idaho Power, and Mike Jones from OneGas. Thanks so much for attending and making us a part of your schedule.
Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye now.
Bye.